the Minister can just clarify under what legislation do arbitrators get their guidance in terms of how they approach an interest arbitration?
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry for the length of time, but we were going between two acts, and as I've said, it's not our department that manages the Industrial Relations Act. What we have now defined is that any instruction of the arbitrator's power is spelled out in the Industrial Relations Act.
Thank you. And that would make sense since nursing home staff are employed by nonprofit and profit-based private corporations. And they're not public servants like the Premier sometimes forgets when he speaks, as he did in the House this morning. So they are subject to the Industrial Relations Act, as you said. And the arbitrators have a lot of powers, I understand. And this I know is the problem, because really it should be the post-secondary education and labor staff who are here to deal with these labor-related questions. But arbitrators have broad powers to summon witnesses, to hear evidence under oath, to receive and accept relevant evidence, to enter any premises concerning the matter, to do a site visit, any matter concerning the dispute, so they go visit the nursing homes. I mean, they have tremendous powers. And so I don't see this amendment as broadening what already are broad powers. These are New Brunswickers, the arbitrators are, with surely the public good of New Brunswick at heart. They're professional people. I'm not sure why there's so much fear of them, but I guess my question is, as was just demonstrated, to alter the process of arbitration in any way. You said, it's been around for a long time, which it has, and you said it needs to be modernized. I don't know. But if that were the case, it should be addressed in the Industrial Relations Act. I mean, the Industrial Relations Act has an entire section dealing with the construction industry and collective bargaining in the construction industry and all the various dispute mechanisms for the construction industry. And surely there could be something in there for the nursing home sector if that's what government wanted to pursue. So it should have been dealt with there. That is the binding interest arbitration part of this legislation. So my question to the Minister, Mr. Chair, is why would she let this anywhere near her bill to put in place the process to establish to identify these, what constitutes essential services for nursing home workers, which is what we all want to see passed?
It's a valid question, Mr. Chair, but the answer is actually very, very evident. The reason that the Essential Services Act was deemed unconstitutional, the primary reason was because it did not include the dispute resolution. And so that had to be incorporated into this legislation.
Understanding is that, so there's two different kinds of arbitration. There's interest, binding interest arbitration, and there's binding grievance arbitration. And the arbitration around the grievance does have to be in here, yes, to deal with situations where there is no agreement in the end on what constitutes essential services. The whole process is laid out there. And in the end, to reach, if the agreement's not reached and if it's at a level that would be considered unconstitutional, that is this level of services, then that's being proposed, then yes, it goes to a grievance binding grievance arbitration. But it's the interest arbitration that's got tacked on after that that we've been talking about all afternoon. That's the problem. That's what belongs in the Industrial Relations Act. If government wants to make changes to that, the Premier seems to think it's going to have a major influence on the outcome of a arbitrator's decision on what the collective agreement should look like in terms of wages. The whole thing should have been dealt with at negotiations in collective bargaining at the table, and here we are. We've got the government's made a final offer. That process is going on, and now we've got this in the wrong place. So I guess I repeat the question. Yes, I understand the reason for the grievance, binding grievance arbitration being in the bill. That has nothing to do with resolving collective bargaining. That has to do with resolving what constitutes essential services. That's fine. But when which is added in the bill, the sections dealing with binding interest arbitration around determining, what the wage should be and so on. Therein lies the problem. That should be in the Industrial Relations Act. Why did you let that near your bill?
So I'm going to try to get this right. It actually was and is deemed by the Supreme Court of Canada that it is interest binding arbitration. That is the missing mechanism. And so that's why we added this component. And this is the legislation that had to be done. And so that is why we've included it with this bill.
Well, Mr. Chair, I guess I don't agree because, if legislation needs to be done, it can be done in a different place. It could have been done and refer to this bill, refer to this act in the Industrial Relations Act. Let me ask, I don't see the material difference with this amendment from what we had because of the wide scope of the latitude that arbitrators have in their work anyways. And we've got decades and decades of experience with that. One of the interesting things to me is if you look at the Public Service Labor Relations Act and look at what I argue should be in the Industrial Relations Act but is in this bill to amend the Essential Services Act and nursing homes, in the Public Service Labor Relations Act, it asks the arbitrator to consider the fiscal policies of the government of the province. And here, it doesn't say that they consider the employer's ability to pay in light of the fiscal policies of the province, but rather the fiscal situation, which is quite different. So, despite my disagreement with which legislation this is in, why would this just not mirror, in the thinking about proposing it, what exists already regarding fiscal, the statement regarding fiscal matters for the government in the Public Service Labor Relations Act? That's Section 82. So why wouldn't it be the same?
I appreciate this question from the member opposite, and Mr. Chair, through you, you are very right. These employees are not part of the public sector section, but the Public Sector Labor Relations Act is quite old, and in fact, the last amendment to it was 30 years ago. And so, in doing this legislation, we did a jurisdictional scan. We have the same language as Nova Scotia and Ontario.
Yes, I'm sure it's the same as Ontario. Anyway, that's fine. Thank you for the response to the chair. And Mr. Chair, on the amendment, that's all I wanted to raise with the minister, and thank her for her responses.